Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hi, I am Dalip Singh. For the second edition of the podcast on State of Economy, we will be discussing today a topic which is Indian defense setup and challenges posed by emerging technologies that is capturing everybody's mind. Who better than Lieutenant General V.J. Khandare, Principal Advisor to Ministry of Defense, to broach the subject? Let me briefly introduce General Khandare, a Garhwal Rifles infantry officer who has had an illustrious career. He was DG, Defense Intelligence Agency, before hanging his boots in 2018. Later, he went on to become military advisor to National Security Council Secretariat. Welcome, General Khandare, to the podcast. Sir, we would like to know, in fact, request you to give us a sense on the new grammar of futuristic warfare. Much of it was reflected in the unending battle between Russia and Ukraine. Often it is said, sir, that wars don't change, weapons do. But now it appears that the line dividing war and peace has thinned out. Now there is a talk of hybrid war. Emerging technologies like drones and AI are ensuring that attacks and sabotages continue without getting into a battlefield. It's no longer about losing one Jawan or an inch, but a bite lost could also trigger face-off between nations.
Thank you. Very interesting topic and a good question for everyone to understand. When we talk of nations dealing with each other, and especially with the identified adversaries, people have started talking of unrestricted warfare, hybrid warfare, fifth generation warfare. There are numerous terms which are used. Somebody calls it unrestricted, never-ending warfare. This is now a complexity which includes conventional, subconventional, unconventional, this kind of warfare, which is a mix of what Putin displayed, and it continues to happen between Russia and Ukraine. But there are other contours of warfare also. Take, for example, non-kinetic domain, cyber warfare, information warfare. From where does it start? Where does it end? Who is initiating it? Who's aggravating it? Nobody gets to know. So these kinds of non-kinetic asymmetric warfare, it is non-attributable, it is deniable. You cannot put your finger as to who has done it. So this is a vast expanse, and this Russia-Ukraine war has busted some myths. People had started saying that we've entered a unipolar world order because of which there'll be no wars, at least no conventional war. So that has gone out of the window. People were talking about short, swift wars. It's been more than a year, the war is not ending. So in a nutshell, if I were to say that there is complexity, there's a lot of ambiguity, there's a lot of uncertainty and volatility. So this is an era where the entire nation has to be on its toes. The entire effort to retain your sovereignty has to be based on every citizen's effort. So it is not left only to the military or to the Ministry of Defense in any country. It's going to be a combined effort and a team effort.
Please take us through the current capability building program of the tri-services, especially in the domains of infra development and weapon system acquisition. More so, given the insecurities from our neighbors, that is fueling investment in advanced defense technologies.
The first part is when you have to do acquisitions, you have to develop your infrastructure, you have to first carry out an environmental scan and a threat perception. So, do we do a threat perception only by the military? No. It is done at the national level, where the national security, which encompasses, say, for example, the physical security, then which essentially means the territorial. Territorial is on land, air, as well as maritime. Then there is food security, then there is energy security, there is space security, cyber security, intellectual security. There are plenty of these domains. So let us come only to the military domain. Now, within the military domain, when we identify our adversaries, then we carry out a study of what capabilities do they have and what intent can they have and how much time and which sector are we looking at. So our acquisitions are also dependent on how do we want to fight the war. Do we want to fight the same kind of war against Pakistan and China? Both are different. So automatically the weapon inventory will be different. The methodology of fighting will be different. The mobility, communication, protection, the survivability, all these things are going to be different. So the inventory is bound to be different. So nobody can say that the troops deployed in Andaman Nicobar should have the same kind of equipment acquisitions as are required on the northern border. So this is how we have to do sector specific, threat specific. Then comes the issue of what is the inventory we are holding? What is the obsolescence that we look at? Is this equipment or technology going to be obsolete, say, in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? What is the technology differential between us and our adversaries? When we look at all these things, then we say, okay, we space out our acquisitions in a manner that we don't get everything changed in one go. We have to have a continuous overlap where we are holding something which we are very used to. There is something which is new, which is being inducted, and we are on the lookout for something beyond. So when we say acquisition is not plain simple buying off the shelf. It is not commercial off the shelf. There is plenty of equipment which has to be designed, developed, then manufactured, then tried out. So all these things are a very complex process, but those who are the stakeholders, that is the users, they know what they want. Then they tell the organizations like the DRDO or ISRO as to what exactly do they want. There are certain elements of our inventory which may not be readily available here, even to DRDO or to the DPSU. So that is where the strategic partnership with friendly foreign countries is done. And then there is a very good mechanism. There is a process, the defense acquisition process, the defense procurement procedure also, 2016-2020. And based on that, the guidelines are given what procedure is to be followed. By following that procedure, at least one is very sure that the procurement process is followed diligently. So there is a process, and there are departments, there are branches, there are directorates which are all involved in this. In all three services, there are different directorates, but by and large, the process for the tri-services is the same.
That brings us to a core area, R&D in defense sector. Everybody, every stakeholder has been voicing concern on the need to invest in R&D. And because unless until we do that, we won't be able to achieve in true sense Atmanirbharta in defense sector. Isn't it so?
See, there are countries which have different models. Like there is a term called the civil-military fusion, and China has mastered that art. How they use it is, they have universities which are paid out of the civil budget, and the R&D is financed by the government in these academia or research institutes. Whatever is the outcome of that research, the military part of it is taken away by the military, and notch lower than the military grade is applied for the civil sector. Take an example of a vehicle. The engine that is being used for a vehicle and an engine with a higher horsepower which has to be used for an armored vehicle, or another type of engine which has to be used for a drone, or an engine which has to be used for aeronautical platforms. So these are all requirements of engines. Now what is done? There is a lot of R&D effort required. Can a private industry afford that? It's extremely difficult. So what is the solution that China has found? That the state government or the entire financing of that is taken on by the state. A lot of money is required, and similar process was followed by DRDO. And in the last couple of years, it was found that the private sector was not benefiting from the research output. Now, DRDO has been sharing the research output with the private sector also. You would have seen that during the DEF Expo in Gandhinagar, during the Aero India in Bangalore, you would have seen how so many MOUs were signed between DRDO and the private industry, how transfer of technology took place. There is a change which has come up. So what were the earlier problems of funding for research? Because private sector obviously cannot run in these kind of investment. It is slightly different in USA also. In USA, everything is run by the private industry. They have a method, very small organization known as DARPA, where they carry out research. They know what is the research. They outsource the research to a large number of academic institutions, research institutions. They get hold of big business houses, say Lockheed Martin or Boeing or anyone for that matter. And they are the ones who fund the research part, but then they have an assurance that the entire order would come to them. In our case, that is one difference, that we have not been giving any assurance to anyone, and we follow the process of bids, and then the lowest bid is taken care of after carrying out the technical evaluation. So this is an issue where civil military fusion has to be done. We cannot follow the American model, we cannot follow the Chinese model, so we are customizing our own model. Other than DRDO, the MOD has gone in for another IDEX program. IDEX program is for the startups, for the MSMEs. The challenges are thrown open, and then the startups bid for it. And there are various Make 1, Make 2, IDEX Prime. Those are the models which are given with different amounts assured. 50% is given by the government and 50% the startup has to invest. The moment there is an interest shown by the MOD, a lot of venture capitalists move in and start offering the startup funds. So in that entire process, you have the user, you have the designer, you have the developer, you have the venture capitalist, you have the production agency, and finally you have again the testing process by the user, and that is how it is incorporated. There is a challenge currently because everything you are not able to carry out research because there are different levels. Like take for example sensors. Even today we don't have the best possible answers for these. You look at the chip, the semiconductors, we don't have an answer for that. So that strategic partnership will continue till such time we reach a level where we can say that our indigenous products are ready based on our research. So it's a continuous and simultaneous procedure which will continue.
So do you think the whole of nation approach you're talking about, that will be facilitated if India had its own national security doctrine? See, because what we are seeing now is there is a seriousness, but no, it's a disjointed effort which is happening.
The document availability of whatever you may call it, national security doctrine, national security strategy, whatever you may call it, but finally it is the coordination that needs to be done either by the PMO, by the NSCS. That is how it requires to be done. Now, the moment we say civil military fusion, that is where interministerial collaboration is required. In the absence of that document that you mentioned, is it that we are not moving ahead? No. We have certain guidelines, we have certain clarity of thought at the apex level. What should be known to a person who has to act upon it is conveyed to him. Take, for example, the services. There is a Raksha Mantri's operational directive. That is known to all the three chiefs. That is known to the CDS. There is a strategic planning group which is held at the level of NSA. There is a limited SPG meeting which takes place. The NSA is very clear in his mind what is required to be done. So he drives it from there. So the concerned ministry is roped in. Take an example of DPSUs and PSUs which are there with most of the ministries. There is some coordination which takes place about the equipment which can be produced by a particular DPSU or by a PSU. How they do it, there is a mechanism which works in the government. And I would say, just because there is a doctrine not available or not being mentioned, doesn't mean that we cannot function. Now, this is a very deliberate decision whether the document has to be made public, not to be made public, because those who are powerful will make such doctrines and such documents public, because you are advertising to your adversary what you are going to do. There is a Union War Book. In the Union War Book, there are three distinct parts of it. That is during peace, then during short of conflict, and during conflict, what each one is supposed to do. When I say during peace, what is it that you're doing during peace? You're ensuring your defense preparedness. What is it that you're doing during short of conflict? Every ministry is responding to the situation where there is no conflict declared. In fact, if you look at our history, how many times have we declared war? Hardly any, but we've been continuously at war, and each segment of the government has been responding. So whether there is a desirability of making such documents public is a choice which is with the apex level of the government.
Fair enough, sir. So far, we have been talking about emerging technology and its impact. So, but what about people who man or will be manning futuristic defense systems and ecosystem? What are we doing to have an evolved approach to cerebral preparations of military leaders? And I would add to that for foot soldiers as well.
The first part is about the clarity, the cerebral clarity of various levels of our human capital. Take an example at the directional level, that is absolutely on top, that is the three service chiefs and the CDS, and their own staff. They have to be very clear as to what are the dangers which are unfolding in different domains and different sectors. Beyond the conventional part, what are the asymmetric parts, the domains that we have to look at? In fact, I would say that the way our history unfolded, even without the term asymmetric being coined, we were faced with the asymmetric threats of terrorism from across. So that is the biggest lesson that we have learned, that the moment we face that threat, we realize that how quickly can we prepare ourselves. You would remember the initial years where there were so many bomb blasts all over the country. There were infiltrations, there were killings, minority killings, and so many things. So that was one kind of new warfare that we had to get into. Now, what are the subsequent new forms of warfare that we will be looking at? Look at the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, domination of the electromagnetic spectrum will either enable the dominator or will disable the person who's being subjected to that. So the first part that we have to look at is capability and capacity enhancement. Capability enhancement would mean equipment. Capacity means training. Now, most of the services have already gone in for establishing centers of excellence, whether it is related to artificial intelligence, big data analysis, quantum technology. So there is a simultaneous approach of interacting with academia, think tanks, simultaneous cross-pollination of officers into DRDO, into ISRO, into IITs. We have in quite a few IITs with their specialization are officers who have already moved into that domain. Even the 5G development, we have military officers into that. And our own designing, because with the new type of warfare, you have to go in for stealth material, stealth manufacturing. So the cerebral part at the level of direction level officers, execution level, again, they have to understand, because they are the ones who have got to translate the thought process into plans, into directions, and then they have to get it executed. Coming to the lowest level, where it is the last man in the chain, they have to start using different kinds of weapons. Now, take, for example, the drones. Now, drones are the latest asymmetric threat, which is not only for military, but for non-military also. You would have heard of so many times drones coming and getting drugs or weapons or ammunition. Now, BSF also has to get used to it. So it's not only in the military domain, it is into the paramilitary or the CAPF domain also. The ITBP, which is along the northern borders, they also have to get used to it. So that is where we started calling the entire fraternity as the security fraternity. and all of us have to train jointly. So if somebody from BSF is being deployed in, say, 15 core zone ahead of Srinagar, so they all train jointly. CRPF also trains jointly. So gradually, as the threat unfolds, we have to keep upgrading our capabilities. And what you mentioned as disruptive technologies, I look at it slightly differently. A disruptive technology will be by a person who's initiating it. But if we have to look at what we want to do, then I call it empowerment technology. If I have AI, it is empowering me. If I have big data analysis, it is empowering me. If I have quantum technology, whether it is in satellites, whether it is in radars, whether it is in computing, it is empowering me. And all these bits of additions are there in our training. I think armed forces are the one particular type of fraternity which trains every year. Collective training is done every year. In addition to that, people like me will keep going for courses. Within the units, there is a continuous training process. And here there is a balance. What you have to carry out as action is meant for training. That is the people who have to do repeated actions. And those at the highest level have to do education. So that in a nutshell is how we prepare ourselves.
Deep technologies require deep pockets, isn't it? And funding is a major challenge for a growing economy like India, no, which is equally caught up with social welfare responsibilities. Are we in a position to fund emerging technologies, next generation technologies, which the country definitely wants given the threat from China, from Pakistan?
Dalip ji, India can always surprise everyone. You remember how we started our atomic program, and despite all the opposition all over the world and the kind of sanctions that were put, we still managed. The kind of funding that was stopped. You remember the kind of missile projects, the space projects. These were at that time also the deep technology of that particular era, and that required deep pockets. Indians have a capability of trying to find simple solutions to complex problems. Whenever there is a challenge, India always comes up with something which is affordable to us. Okay, we may not be able to do it at the scale at which superpowers do, but that is how it is. The superpowers will always have deep pockets. They will always be miles ahead of us in that kind of technology. It's not that we will have the best of glitter and best of the glamour that they have, but we will find our own solutions. And we have always done that. We may possibly be one step behind them or two steps behind them, but we always do that catch up. The strength or the strategy in this lies in making the economy stronger and stronger, and in a very fast time frame, so that we are able to afford to put funds in such activities. And most of the latest technology that we are looking at has tremendous amount of application in civil sector as well. So it cannot be that the expenditure will have to be incurred only by the security sector. On the contrary, the expenditure, once gone through the civil sector, it automatically helps the security sector also. You look at how the automobile industry developed in India. There was entire control. Then you look at the communication, cell phones, and see how we have moved ahead. On the same lines, we'll have to keep moving ahead in a parallel manner, where wherever there is requirement in civil sector and possibility of private sector funding, government funding, that will have to be done. So it's not a very hopeless or a thankless situation. I think we will keep finding answers as applicable to us.
There was another larger sort of democratic question. I think if you can throw more light on that, the constant struggle in a democracy, whether to spend on social issues or on military, how do you answer to that?
Any country where there is democracy, these challenges are very peculiar. So to an extent, it is a very unequal matched race. If you look at autocratic China, they will control where they want to conserve, and the citizens will not be able to say anything to that extent. And you will not even come to know, because there is no transparency for anyone to have a look at the social welfare part. What's happening in Xinjiang and Tibet is for all of us to know. In our country, that is not the case. We are a democratically elected government ruled country. We have adopted a constitution, so obviously that there is no compromise on that. We'll have to continue to balance in that. So maybe our pace will be a little slow. In most of the cases, you would have found we may not have had the best equipment, but the human capital has been so good that it has compensated for range lower than the best and delivered the best results. I can give you an example. When we became independent, what inventory did we inherit? We inherited the British inventory of World War II.
Yeah.
What inventory did the Pakistanis get? They got from the Americans the best possible inventory. You remember 1965 Sabre jets versus the Nat from the British days, but the pilots were extremely good. You then come to subsequent period, the latest one, say 1999 in Kargil, without the air power also, using the artillery guns in the most imaginative manner. So, like when General Malik said during Kargil, we'll fight with what we have and we'll win. And that's exactly what happened. So, in a democracy, such challenges will always be there. We are not Pakistan, where Pakistan army decides on how much budget it wants and rest is left to the people. But then their ideology is such that even if they don't get anything, when it comes to Hate India campaign, the entire country comes on one platform. So we have our own peculiarities. We must look at our own challenges and we must find our own solutions.
So on the front of Atmanirbharta in defense sector, we have traveled quite a few distance. But there are certain gray areas. A decision-making process is one which most of them identify. Then to certain extent, transparency. Many a times, no, they say that they don't know what is happening. Can you throw some light? Is there a need for second wave of reforms in defense sector so that these aspects can be looked into?
See, these don't require reforms. These just require modifications in the processes. We all learn as we travel the journey. I'll give you an example. A good example is how Navy realized that decision making has to be fast. So they just flattened the decision making process and they put 4 officers under the vice chief, and decisions are taken, contracts are prepared, and orders are given. In June 2022, when the Prime Minister announced 75 challenges open to private sector or to people, innovators, I would say, in Swavalamban, last month, beyond those 75, 25 more have been given. So 100 contracts have been signed in the last about 1 year. That's a very good speed at which Navy has projected its work. And in Aero India, in Def Expo, the kind of challenges which were thrown open by the Prime Minister for space also, 75 challenges were thrown open for space. The first contract has been signed. And mind you, space is a very complex process. It cannot be so easily done. It is not a nut and bolt. It is something which is traveling in the outer space. The gravitational pull, the forces that are applied, the temperatures, and indigenization of that requires a lot of effort from the startups. So decision making, I give you one good example. I'm sure the others will follow the good practices that they have seen. It does not require reforms. It requires changing of your process and mindsets. The attitudes have to change, and everyone has to identify that he is a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. The second part which you said is about the transparency. Yes, there is an issue. By nature, military officers will not want to reveal anything. And by nature, industry will want to know everything. So that is a matchmaking that has to be done in a manner. People have come to quite a few changes. Yes, the hunger for changes will be much more in the industry also. Now the hunger for changes should actually come up from the user, because they must start demanding things earliest and they must see how they can speed up. If processes were taking 3 years, now processes have started coming down to about a year. And same is the case with the ministry also. The time taken is much less, but transparency, again, there is always a danger in a democracy where accountability has to be fixed. People are always worried or concerned, and rightly so, that their reputation should not be tarnished. They are at positions which require people with high integrity, and there is a selection process. The military secretaries branch in all three services positions people with very high integrity. They are very careful that their integrity should not be compromised. There are unethical elements who are dealing with them also, so they have to be cautious there. So at times it so happens that being overcautious could possibly create some uneasiness among the industry also. But I have seen a lot of good officers reaching out. I have seen a lot of good people from the industry reaching out. There will be some pain points, but I think by mutual dialogue, by reaching out to each one, they will resolve it. I don't think it is end of the journey as such. In fact, we are moving in a very fast pace. Things are changing, but the number of things that have to be changed are far too many. And government processes and procedures have a method which is to be followed, even if it has to be changed. If something was made in 2020 and you want to change it in 2021, no one will agree to that. But there are other departments and ministries also where such changes have happened, where the pace has been very fast. I think we can pick up all good lessons from everywhere.
Futuristic warfare demands many a times can suffer from inherent contradictions. And I say this because it can run into infinite. So do you think there is a need to run a check of pragmatism on next generation requirements? For example, the army recently floated an RFP for robotic mules. I remember reading somewhere in global publication that even US Army gave up this idea because they found that it was operationally unfeasible. Your thoughts?
What is not feasible or not desirable for US may not necessarily fit the bill here. We may find it quite useful. In fact, when they're talking of robotic mules or exoskeletons are found very useful by the Chinese in the high altitude areas. Those are essential for us also. How do you deliver logistics? How do you go to an altitude of 5,000 meters? Do you use the drones only? Currently, there aren't enough evidences to say that the drone engines will be capable of going up to that altitude and also countering the wind speeds at that level. So you have to find some other solution. Now, US obviously is not being attacked there, and US is not fighting in any high altitude area. In fact, they are coming to us to learn from our experience as to how to fight in high altitude areas. So just because it is US doesn't mean that they know everything. And we have for decades together been holding positions at high altitude. And when we look at robotic mules or we look at exoskeleton, and we have been working hard towards those solutions, maybe we will come up with a solution which others may want to emulate at a later stage. You look at the kind of speed which has gathered for logistic supply. I have served on Siachen Glacier. I know how difficult it is. Between 16,000 to 21,000 feet climb, we could barely carry 10 kgs, and every day we had to do those link patrols in which I as an officer was also doing it. So whether the US finds it useful or not, let's see at which place are they deployed at 21,000 or 61,000. They're not. They may come for expeditions. They may have those buggies which they use in Afghanistan, and then they leave it there and run away. So all those things are their experiences. We will find our own solutions.
So US I just mentioned because but to be very precise, they said the robotic mules will make kind of noises, which compromises your whole operational ability. So that was just one example which came to my mind to sort of, but my broad contention was, is there a need for a reality check on futuristic demands? That was my question largely.
Okay. I'll give you an example. Alouette helicopter, light helicopter, which we call Cheetah or Chetak, the French designed it not to fly higher than 12,000 meters, 12,000 feet. At what altitude are we landing them? We are landing them at 16,000. Solam is a post at 16,000. When the Alouette engineers came to India, they were shocked as to how is this engine performing at this altitude. So we have that great capability to find solutions by common sense. We may not have the ideal solution, but we have a practical solution. Now, when you say what are the future warfare requirements and what is a reality check or an audit that we have done, each of the service has an organization for perspective plans. They have a system of finding out that what is it that we would need, what is it that we have, what is existing in the market. So if I divide technology into three parts, every country is morally duty bound to give niche technology to its armed forces. Whether you give it or not is a different issue. The second part is emerging technology, because that is in the advanced countries, it is under manufacture or in the final stages of development. So obviously we look at it that this is something which we will be requiring in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever. And then there is an incubating technology which is still in the mind or in the lab. At all stages, all three such discoveries are being done in each of the three services. And then there is a lot of indigenization of this. Like Navy, they have VESI, where they do their own designs. You look at Army, they have their own solutions which are being done, say in software. There is a particular organization. In simulators, they have a particular organization. In DRDO, they have their own methods of doing it. Okay, you look at how Air Force has been able to create solutions. Because of the Russia-Ukraine war, there are problems which in the supply chain management. But Air Force has overcome. Probably Russia would want some help from us. So we have a system, and I think it is in our DNA that we are able to find solutions. And there is a lot of thinking that goes on. In fact, you should hear how the CDS explains how the transformation is being thought of and how it is being done. One of my own regimental officers has come into the strategic planning directorate, and I was discussing with him the other day, and he told me how they are looking at things even in the next decades, how there could be contestations in space and how we are going to combat that. What will happen if there is a chemical and biological threat? How will we counter that? So these are all things which happen simultaneously, and they have to continue. It's not that there is ever a full stop. If there is a full stop on a particular line, there is second line which is already moving. A third line is being formed. So these are different levels of technology readiness. And that is where we continuously keep moving.
So we could not now include space in our discussion this time due to paucity of time. Perhaps another session we would look into that important aspect as well. Nonetheless, sir, thanks for joining us and informing our listeners on our defense preparedness, and which would definitely secure the nation against any future threats. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you.